Our research unit is interested in figuring out what can we know, what do we know about English-speaking communities in the province. We're an official language minority community recognized under federal jurisdiction, but provincially, the situation is different. We have a different language law situation here than we do at the federal level. So it's a complex environment, and it's in that environment that we try to make known what has been done in terms of research on English-speaking Quebec. We do that in various ways. We have activities like this one today. We have online a vast bibliography that that brings to light research on English-speaking Quebec. We have a newsletter. We have various online activities as well. If you haven't already signed up for the mailing list for Questgren, I invite you to do so. So if you go on your phones and look up questgren.ca, I invite you to do that. So questcren.ca. I'm a shameless huckster. I promote this at every opportunity. And then you look under resources, newsletter, and there's a button there you click to sign up. And you're very, very welcome to participate in our activities. We definitely operate on the understanding that it is through networking and bringing groups together and people in a room that we can have better and more powerful impact to find solutions to the challenges that we as community members face. So I'll leave it at that. You're very welcome to attend our events, consume the different products that we put out to make research known, and to share with us your points of view. Without further ado, welcome. I will introduce my colleague, Anita Aloisio. She is responsible for the ILET Impact Project, which she will present in a moment. And Anita, if you don't know this yet, is also a fantastic and gifted filmmaker who came to public attention through, for me anyway, a film called Les Enfants de la Loi 101. So Anita has a long-standing commitment and capacity of bringing to people's attention issues important to our communities. Anita?
Thank you. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you all for attending the workshop today. So as Lorraine mentioned, I am ILET Impact Lead and in replacement of the Lena Shumaruva, who started along with the team at Questgren this wonderful initiative. So ILET stands for it's an acronym that stands for the Interlevel Education Table, which was established by Questgren to support Quebec's English language education system through research and educational activities and initiatives such as this one. And recently we launched the ILET Impact Project. And as I said before, I am a project lead, but again, I dived into this project with much enthusiasm and being supported by a fantastic team. And the project is, in essence, the conceptualization of a website that would feature various media products that would make the research much more accessible. This is the way we've found to describe the mission for the ILET Impact Project. So at its heart, again, it's a pioneering initiative, and it acts as a central access point to research. And through diverse media platforms, including research video capsules, which feature researchers and their work, podcasts, where there's a conversational setting where researchers can actually talk about, along with a host, their work, infographic platforms, and supplementary content via story maps. And all this because we want to aim to enhance accessibility to research. And personally, the way I see it, it's like knowledge in constant motion that remains fluid and dynamic and can be adapted to various broadcasting forms to ensure broader access. And I see this workshop doing the same. The blended learning workshop today exemplifies our commitment to knowledge mobilization, empowering educators, and fostering community vitality. And we are really thrilled to be collaborating with the impressive team of pedagogical advisors at John Abbott College in making this event possible. And of course, it's always a collaboration. It's always a team effort. Nothing happens without everyone's expertise. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the afternoon and also part of the John Abbott team, Amanda Argento. Amanda is a pedagogical counselor and project lead in the design of the John Abbott College Innovation Hub. This is an educational and innovative resource available to faculty, staff, and to the college community. Its staff have incredible depth of pedagogical knowledge and the key collaborators in today's workshop. So thank you, Amanda, for accepting to moderate the event. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine and Anita. Welcome to today's workshop, Connecting Through Blended Learning in Post-Secondary Education. I look forward to guiding us through some very informative presentations and engaging discussions, all centered around blended learning. In collaboration with the Interlevel Education Table, we have a great event for you this afternoon. I'd also like to take some time to thank all the incredible people listed here who have supported this event. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. So for our first block from 1 to about 2:15, we'll be doing a brief introduction and an icebreaker, transitioning into our first presentation of the day by Andrea Cooperberg on research and implementation of the blended learning modality. That'll be followed by a quick break until 2:45. Then we'll be joined by Candice Steenbergen and Valerie Baer for a presentation on their recent ECQ-funded research findings on blended learning, another quick break. And we will finish today with some quick wrap-up integrative and collaborative activities and concluding remarks. Before we get started for today, we'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So I'm going to ask you to please take out your cell phone, or if you have a laptop, you can join the link as well. So you can go ahead and scan or type in the link that we have at the bottom right here. And you'll be prompted to answer 4 short questions, and I'll share some of the results so we can get to know each other. So we're just going to be asking you which institution you're joining us from today, what your ideal learning environment looks like. Then we'll ask you to turn to the person next to you and ask them about a memorable educational experience that they had when they were a student and summarize the highlights. And we'll ask you to briefly describe your relationship with the blended learning modality. So I'll give you a minute to fill it out, and then I'll go through some of the answers. And let me know if you have any trouble joining the link. You have to do all of them. You can go ahead and answer all of them, and then I'll give you another 30 seconds just to wrap up your discussions, put in those answers, and hit submit. Okay, you can go ahead and submit those questions. We'll take a look at some of the answers. So we seem to be split between Concordia and John Abbott College. Some colleagues from St. Lambert. Thank you for making your way here. MEQ, Dawson, some good CEGEP representation. So thank you all so much for joining us. What is your ideal learning environment? So we have people saying collaborative, that there's a task at hand, lots of flexibility, the learning is experiential, lots of space, that it's authentic, that it's common focused. So what we'll see today is that the blended learning modality lends itself really well to a lot of people's ideal learning environment. So it's great that everybody seems to learn that way. And then in terms of a memorable educational experience, was a class on technology using the smartboard. It was dynamically presented, students across grades, connecting individually, a range of students, and a lot of technology mediated responses. So again, the idea of this question was to show you that most of our most memorable educational learning experiences may not have taken place in a sort of traditional classroom, chalkboard type class. They may have, but oftentimes we seek a little bit more when it comes to our learning experiences. So I'll just transition us out of this presentation and back to the slides. Thank you all so much for participating. So I'll soon be inviting Andrea Cooperberg to join me for the first leg of the workshop this afternoon. But before she does, please allow me to introduce my wonderful colleague and office mate. Born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Andrea worked as a teacher with a master's in communication sciences with an orientation in education. Upon her arrival, which she says 21 winters ago, she completed a master's in educational technology right here at Concordia University. Prior to working at John Abbott College, Andrea worked as an instructional designer at the Center for the Study of Learning and Performance at Concordia University, CSLP, developing digital educational programs for schools. She also worked in elementary and high schools as an educational technology specialist, providing support and training to teachers on technology implementation, as well as an e-learning course developer from Bombardier. She began working as a pedagogical counselor at John Abbott College just a couple weeks prior to the start of the pandemic and played an integral role on the team responsible for preparing and supporting the move to online courses. Andrea helped guide what soon became the faculty online support team through the many educational and pedagogical challenges posed by emergency distance education. Today, she's here to talk about her passion, how technology and alternative modalities can stimulate students' curiosity and engagement in and outside of the classroom, so long as we prioritize the pedagogy. Andrea?
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for coming this afternoon. Thank you, Amanda, for your kind presentation. Thank you, Anita, Lorraine, and Doug, our boss, that is there for supporting us this event and having the opportunity to collaborate among us. So for this afternoon, I'd like to start by sharing with you the goals for this afternoon, what we're going to do together. So we're going to explore the principles of blended learning, the modes of delivery, and the implementation at John Abbott as an example. We're also going to discover pedagogical strategies that we could use to design our blended learning courses. And we're also going to learn with Valerie and Candace about the intercollegiate ECQ grant. And the main idea is to share, to collaborate, to exchange experiences among us with a college across the English language post-secondary sector. And of course, the idea is to get inspired. So I'd like to start with a little bit of storytelling of what are the ways that I got very involved with blended learning, why I got involved with blended learning. So as Amanda was saying, I studied in Argentina education, first communication, and then my last years were oriented to educational technology. And I have the opportunity in the 90s to learn from my teachers that were talking about the meaningful experiences that we have. And I was lucky to have teachers that showed me that technology could be anything that we have in a room. A pen, the paper, the whiteboard, is the way we use it educationally that makes it meaningful for the students. Then in the 90s as well, 99, I took a distance learning course in Spain. I was going to bring the sound of the internet that we have in those years, that it's a tick, and you have to use your phone, like that connection. So either you use internet or you use the phone, and that was a great experience because it was not like now that we have pictures. There was not pictures, not avatars. We just were provided every week with readings, and at the end of the week we needed to participate in a forum and be lucky if somebody emails you, or because everything was developing at that time. And then I came here. In 2 days will be 22 years, winters. I don't know who thinks about coming in February, but we were brave. And I studied at Concordia. I actually very happy to be here today because it reminds me my days when I did my master's. And I then work in many institutions until I applied to John Abbott as pedagogical counselor. And then, as Amanda said, the pandemic started, and we needed to prepare the college to teach online. And that's where we realized, by hearing the teachers, the need of integrating what we were learning during the pandemic what we were using in person. And that's the idea for today, to realize how we could combine both. This is a very busy slide. It's just to show you that the definition of blended learning could be very, very different depending on how the institutions decide to implement it. So I put one term, many interpretations or many uses. And I choose blended learning is an instructional and pedagogical approach that combines face-to-face and online learning activities. And why did I put this in blue? Because I try to define what are the online learning activities. And we spend a lot of time with Action Award trying to define what could be those activities. We know that we replace face-to-face, but with what? So some institutions will replace it with online meetings. Some others will replace with asynchronous work that the students will do independently at their own time. And I divided two colors, and I'll let you read for a couple of seconds. So I divided in green and orange. The green one definitions are more related to the setup, how we're gonna divide the online and asynchronous activities, what we're gonna use. We're gonna use technology, how much seat time we'll have in the class, and how much time we'll devote to asynchronous activities. But the orange ones are more related to the design, the integration, the pedagogy that we need to take into consideration to plan and blend these two instances. I wanted to share with you also the different models that you can see around institutions, and you might have tried them. So I selected 3, but of course, if you read, you'll find more models, as I said before. The flipped classroom, the first one, is when the teacher pre-assign activities, and most of the times are videos, podcasts, online resources, where the students have to learn by themselves the content, and then when the class meets face-to-face, the teacher will organize group activities, tutorials, to debrief on recap of what the students did independently. The second one is mostly what we use at John Abbott, is blended block model. So we have face-to-face and, in our case, asynchronous online activities that are structured by block. So that's why the teacher might have a schedule that says day 1, or they will meet in the class, day 2 will do this, and etc. The last one is fully online, what we experienced during the pandemic, but also you can combine the online with asynchronous activities. Instead of meeting in Teams or Zoom, the students will work by themselves. And I forgot to tell you that you'll have to answer questions. But the idea is that we collaborate. This is empty because after I define a couple of things, I want you to tell me, if you want, what are the benefits that you find about this modality. Okay, amazing. Yeah, exactly. So what the research says, and of course you can keep looking, there are so many resources. I try to gather the main ones. So flexibility could be exactly a benefit, but also a challenge. The students have flexibility, but also they need to manage the skills and responsibilities. They need to get the work done within a deadline by themselves. So could be a challenge. Virtual citizens, the students, we are giving the opportunities for students to learn about technology, to use the technology, to get used to different applications that they might use in the workplace, for example. We can create a community of learners, and we'll talk about this later. And we also, the research says that it might improve students' learning outcomes and also motivation. That could be also a challenge. Some students might feel that they're not motivated at all. We can say that enhance collaboration and communication skills. And the things that, the other challenge that we face is the design and scheduling. Some students might feel lost because they might not know when they're gonna meet, how they need to submit the work. So we're gonna talk about strategies that help the teachers in the planning. I now wanted to talk about our implementation at John Abbott and clarify that this takes time. It's been years that we're working on it. As you see in the timeline, we have a pre-pandemic work done by a couple of teachers from humanities and physics that they saw this modality as an opportunity, and they implemented, and they also wrote a literature review and recommendations. From that, we have a committee at the college that revises all the uses of technology. It's called PANT, Pedagogical Uses of New Technology, and is composed by the different teams at the college. We have professionals, we have people from the library, different faculty, ITS, administration. So together, we came out with the procedure that was approved by the Academic Council in June 2021. And then from there, our first formal implementation was in winter 2022. And the idea, as I mentioned, was to integrate what we learned from the pandemic with our face-to-face mode of delivery. And what you see on the left, and it took a long time to produce, is the definition. What we see how we see blended learning at John Abbott, and we see it as blended learning as a percentage of technology that is mediated, technology mediated, asynchronous lectures, with a combination of in-campus classes. That's why we ask the students to have a computer and reliable internet, because they'll need to work on tasks that they require getting into different applications such as Moodle or Teams to connect with other students, etc. And the blended learning procedure is a guides teachers for blended learning implementation. I gathered here the main points of the procedure that we have at John Abbott. So we guide the teachers in terms of the application process. Teachers can have until up to 2 semesters to try this modality, sorry. And then they can apply for a formal approval of their course. And they need to the college adds the annotation that I referred before in the schedule. So when the students register to a course, they see a sign that says this course is blended. Portion of your class will be in person, portion will be asynchronous. And we have on the right the considerations that the teacher needs to add to the course outline. It's not going to be a regular course outline. They have to add the percentage, and that's a big discussion also. How much of the course will be devoted to asynchronous, how much will be devoted to face-to-face. So they cannot go more than 50%, because that's what we discover from the literature that is more convenient. And I'm telling you why, because we leave the first and last classes to meet in person. And we'll talk about this, but it's important that the teacher create this community of learners. And also a clear schedule. We talked about before, the student needs to know when, what to do. So a clear schedule that says, we're gonna do this and you want to do that. And I ask them to put colors. Some like to put colors to address to give this information to the student that is key. In terms of ponderation, it's also important that the teachers respect the ponderation for the course. We know sometimes when we start the blended learning course, it's easy to provide more resources and read this and watch this video. And then we don't realize that the course is like becoming 1.5 course. So that's why we work with the teachers on that. Office hours, the teachers need to offer office hours online as well as in person to also give flexibility for the students. They need to add in the section of teaching methods how this blended learning will be addressed in terms of pedagogy. How are you going to use your face-to-face and how are you going to use your asynchronous time? And at the end, also, of course, the support. What type of platforms as a teacher they're going to use? They're going to use Moodle, how they're going to get into Moodle, all the specifications, as well as how they can contact IT if they have any problem. So in terms of the support that we provide to the teachers, the first step will be for them, they apply for every semester, we have a call, and they meet with basically they meet with me. And we meet at the beginning of the course and at the end, so to debrief and to brainstorm and then to debrief on the course. And we also have a community of practice to share experiences, have dedicated sessions about, let's say, Moodle, discussion forums. We sharing different experience from different disciplines, and that was very, very valuable. Teachers had the opportunity to meet other teachers while we were during the pandemic because of these sessions. And also we have teacher release. We have teachers at the college that have released to support. Candace and Valerie were our support when we first started. They were instrumental because it's very important to have teachers supporting other teachers. And then we have a survey at the end of every semester to recap on the students as well as on the teachers. And for this is new, this summer, we have a blended learning report that collects data from the student's point of view, taking into account the 3 semesters that we were doing blended learning. And we also have a community for the students. It's not so popular. We need to, if you have ideas, let us know. And now I'll invite you to discuss with the person next to you how is blended learning at your institution. We'll have a couple of minutes. Thank you. We'll continue and then we'll have coffee in a couple of minutes to keep chatting. These are examples of resources that we created at John Abbott. The first one is a handout created by Valerie. We felt that it was important for the students to learn more about the specific, what do they expect to do when they take a blended learning course. The second one is for the teachers. So it's a sway that shares a lot of resources for teachers, articles, webinars that we organize at the college, recordings, and different type of presentations that they can revisit. The third one is a resource for students, but has to do with all the IT support links, tutorials on how to use Teams, how to use Moodle, so different things that the teacher can plug in that link in the course outline, and the students will be able to open them as required. So at this point, we're going to start looking at the strategies that I mentioned. And as I mentioned before, it's just a recipe. Then you can add or take out what you need for your discipline, your course, your institution. And I choose two different frameworks that can help teachers when they start designing their blended learning course. The first one is the backwards design. And as you know, as we did at the beginning of this presentation, we set the goals for this afternoon. But what I added in blue is what a teacher could think in terms of blended learning. So yes, we're going to think about the objectives, but we're going to identify also what are the blended learning objectives or skills we want the students to acquire at the end of the course. Do we want to work collaboratively, independently, any goal that you can have in mind. The second one, we're gonna see how we're gonna make sure that our students are learning. What are the assessments that we're gonna employ in our course? And again, we're gonna think about the type of assessment, summative, formative, from the blended learning side as well. We're gonna use online quizzes. What type of things will help us see if the students are learning, or how are they learning. The third step is to plan our course, and also we're gonna map up the blended learning course in all the aspects that we need to cover. The second framework is the community of inquiry. This framework was a model developed in the 2001, by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer. And the main objective of this model was to help students to have a good experience when they were studying online. But we adapted it. We even adapted for in-person. It can be used in any modality. And we have three type of presences that can guarantee us that the learning experience is successful for the student. And here I add a little bit of description of each of the aspects. We have the social presence, in which the students will have a voice, how the students will identify with our community, how they're going to discuss the communication, the interaction that will be in the group. The second one is the teaching present. And this is very important because how as teachers will promote, will design all these activities to make sure that the students are collaborating and part of the community. They don't feel isolated like we talked before. They feel like they are part of the group. So how we organize our course. The third one, it has to be with the cognitive presence. It has to be with the content. Which activities will promote that will help students connect with the content? Which activities will organize to promote self-assessment and metacognition? So, and then we have the definition of the community of inquiries go beyond the fact that we are accessing information when we teach, we're providing information. The idea is to create a community in which the students collaborate each other. We foster curiosity, creativity, etc. So the other thing that is important that to take into account when we are planning a blended learning course is how we're going to integrate the in-person and the asynchronous. The idea is in the middle to blend, to integrate, to complement each other. And we know that they're very different. The in-person is spontaneous. I would say ephemeral. I was going to say that today is ephemeral, but we have a camera that is recording us. So I won't, we'll have a testimonial. Passion, direct contact. We prepare differently when we are going to meet with people in face-to-face. And we know that we're going to build a community like right away. We're going to chat. We're going to, in terms of asynchronous, it's more reflective. we have more time to think if we are chatting with somebody, if we're adding a question in a forum. So it's more reasoning and give us time to think, to rewrite, and usually it's technological mediated. And it's permanent. What we write, it stays there. I think they say it's less intimidating. I'm sure I will be less nervous if I'm in Teams or Zoom than here because we only see our face. So in terms of practical strategies, I divided what we could say the before, the during, and the after. So what we could do before an in-person class? How are we going to make sure that our students are prepared to be in our class and participate? So we have different tips, different strategies using prior knowledge surveys, self-assessment quizzes to know what they're learning, what they know about the topic, pre-readings, assignments that require collaboration. That's our, I would say, key to build this community. And they don't feel isolated. They need to rely on somebody else. Narrative presentations using PowerPoint, videos with integrated questions, and also discussion forums. These are some ideas. You might find thousands of more ideas. So then what could we do during the in-person class? More and more we hear teachers that they use mini lectures. They don't use the whole 2 hours it's something that we notice, but they enjoy the other part to do active learning, which means they can use quizzes, surveys, feedback to gather information about the students, recap on posts that they discuss in the forums. So that will be a strategy to blend what they did asynchronous and what they're doing in class. Group board presentations that they might need to prepare before and in their asynchronous time. Small group work, peer review, working peers to review some work, some drawings, anything that they're working on, showcase student work, and I put classroom assessment techniques that are techniques that inform the teachers how are the students learning. Could be 1-minute paper that the student needs to answer what they learned during that class and what are the still questions that they might have. Think, pair, and share conversations, anything that will happen in the class and it won't happen in any other thing, any other modality that they'll feel that it's worth it to go to class. And then we have the after class. So what follows up we're going to use to connect the theory and the practice. Some teachers like to use formative and summative assessment. Think about formal things that skills that they need to acquire. Could be an anonymous end of week survey to see how they're doing. Journaling, like the students might need to recap of what they learned. You can assign a study group to summarize the class discussion and then post it in the forum, and then they have to present or do a video or in the individual work or group work. And also a lot of teachers that are using blended at the college, they use asynchronous to practice. Some teachers are from technical programs and they need to learn about different websites, about different applications, and they use the asynchronous part to follow modules, practice modules, and then when they are in class, they review if they have questions on how they done, and the teacher can also follow up and review who's done the work on these programs. So my question is, which activity would you like to try if you haven't tried it, or maybe you try it, you want to try it again? Yes. Oh, yes. I forgot about that. Perusal is, do you know about, it's okay, an annotated application that the teachers assign readings and the students can annotate their answer questions and annotate about the readings, the paragraph, and other students can also jump in and discuss. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, good. The last thing that I wanted to mention is about the technology implementation. So we suggest teachers to use an LMS. What is an LMS? I put the Wikipedia definition. It's a software application that helps administrate documentation, post things, um, delivery the course, report what the students are learning, track, deliver quizzes. It's basically in one place you can have everything there. You can have a discussion forum. So we have three, I don't know, in your institution, we have three platforms that are supported by the college, Moodle, Teams, and LEAD. They're very different. Some teachers is their preference of use, what they like to use with the students. And the beauty of this is that the teacher can share activities, announcements, quizzes. It provides the students, like we talked before, to be virtual citizens, to communicate with each other. And also, we have a team that I created for us as an example, as a model of what we could do asynchronous together. So everybody's part of the team, and I'm going to start adding stuff. And if you want to add your comments or ask questions, I'm going to add this presentation as well so we can keep communicated. Other apps that we can use could be Mentimeter, Book Club, Padlet, and all the Microsoft 365 suite that is very complete. This is an example of the Moodle that I created about blended learning because it's my it's a course. So you see there are activities there are announcements. So everything can be there for all the students. So in summary, blended learning implementation, as any big project, requires a team effort from the institution in terms of define and implement, define what blended learning is, how it's going to be implemented, if you're going to have a blended learning procedure or guidelines for the teachers. In terms of technology support, it's also important to realize how we can support teachers on the use of technology, and also how we're going to support teachers in terms of pedagogy and students to learn about this modality at the college or at other institutions. It requires a reflection of how we design our course and how we're going to implement our teaching practices. I could say that is a step-by-step process. It cannot happen from one day to the other. It takes time, and it's continued learning. It's a learning in progress. We're still learning. We're still asking ourselves, is this good? How this will impact the students? Benefits, challenges. It's an ongoing process. And the ultimate goal is to generate a deep approach for learning, that the students, they learn, they know what are the goals and how to get there and succeed in their studies. Any questions?
Get us started. I have a question.
Okay.
What's some of the feedback that you've heard from students? Do they enjoy the modality? Do they find it isolating? Like, what do the students have to say?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Um,
If you can touch on it briefly.
Yeah, briefly is based on the blended learning report. We have like I show you the benefit and challenges, that's the same thing that the students, some students, they love it. Some students, they feel like, oh, I felt lost. I didn't know what to do. So it's very different way. Yeah, it's variable.
Wait. Yes, please. And can you introduce yourself as well at the same time?
So my name is Tracy McKee, and I work at John Abbott College. And I'm just curious in terms of the research that you've done. Obviously, I'm very familiar with the work that you have done, but are there some disciplines that lend themselves sort of more easily to this modality, or does blended learning work no matter what the content is?
Well, at the beginning, we found a lot of science-oriented research, STEM, that they were more, they have the tendency to say, okay, blended learning will suit perfectly. But I think it will depend on the discipline, the teacher, the course, the subject. Some subjects might suit, even in one program that I'm working with, the ILT, Integration Technology Librarian. Is that okay?
Information and library
Information,
technology.
sorry. The program is, they have a lot of courses, but we work with the coordinator, the program coordinator, to pick the best courses that are suitable, where the students, like I said before, use the asynchronous time to practice, and they don't have to do it in the class. When they come to class, they summarize what they did. They answer doubts, questions that the students might have. Yes, that.
Well, are you done with Tracy's question?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
Tracy, is that okay?
Just one further comment on that. So my name's Doug Brown. Tracy's my boss at John Abbott, right? But just before I get to my question, just on the issue of disciplines, information and library technology is a relatively small program, and it's very easy for them to coordinate across the 3 years of the program what the different teachers are doing. So I don't know if that is a kind of context in which it can be extremely effective, because the people who are not doing it are aware of what's being done in it. That's just, and they have a small cohort of students, like roughly 25 students per year. So it is quite cohesive. But I have a question, Andrea, but one detail. It's when you
You want to go? We want you.
Well, I think I can describe it. You said what it is like in person and what it's like when it's blended and it's asynchronous. And you said the activities on the other side, on the asynchronous side, were less intimidating, things like it. But you also said there's less rigor. I just didn't understand why those would be less rigorous. And I'll just give you 2 examples. It may be that it's less rigorous because it involves informal journal responses. So you're not really looking for the right answer. You're looking for this student to say something of interest. But if it were, say, math, it could easily be, or something sort of more conceptual, it could easily be more rigorous, because you would really want strictly them to follow some protocol or to come up with some answers. So why did you say less rigor on that side?
Yeah, I think it was meaning about the instance that we're here and we need to provide the correct answer. Like, we're pressed to instantaneously answer a question like now, and it has to be correct. But when we are online, we have more time, it's less rigorous in the sense that we have more time to think about what we're gonna respond to a discussion forum, or more time to, let's say, watch a video if we need to watch a video as many times as we need, time to reflect on the question. Let's say you post questions and I need to answer for the following class. It's not the same as having us here. Some students might benefit from that because there are less pressure, right, to answer in front of all the class.
Okay, good. So I'll follow up with one last question then.
Yes.
I'm just curious, maybe you could describe the different responses to blended learning, because we have 21 programs, many departments, and there are departmental cultures and program cultures that are different. How does it vary across an institution, the sort of uptake and the interest in blended learning? I mean, I have an idea of what the answer is, but you might want to share it.
Yes, that's a great question. Actually, I was going to describe a little bit. It varies from semester to semester because we have different teachers applying. We have some teachers who take a sabbatical. But we have a big number of teachers who are from humanities. From the beginning, they apply and they want to do blended, and also from English, humanity and English. And then we have a couple from physics and chemistry. And then we have some from the technical programs, which is very interesting. We had one from computer science, many from information library and technologies. But yeah, it's a good mix, I would say. But it would be good to keep, um, raising awareness so we can have more teachers on board.
Hi, I am Jody Murray. I am from the Ministry of Education, and I am wondering what you would say are some of the biggest misconceptions about blended learning from a student, a parent, and a teacher perspective, either on the positive side, they thought it was going to be really hard, but it turned out to be a really positive thing, or I thought it was going to be a cinch to redesign my course, but this thing turned out to be really a roadblock. What are the biggest misconceptions for those three groups?
So I'll start from the students. Some students, they would think that the asynchronous class, because they don't have to be in class, they don't have to do anything. Like, they feel like it's a day off. Yeah, so it's less workload, which is not the case. They still need to do the work. It's just a different modality. And they might feel that some positive comments a lot that they thought it was going to be very hard, and they'll need to use a lot of management skills, but some they said I really managed to use them. Some they still say, okay, it was too much. I thought it was going to be easier because it's blended, but it turned out is I need to do a lot of work to catch up, and be on top of things when I have to submit work. In terms of parents, I don't really know because we don't. I don't know if you heard anything from parents. Okay, because I have my son, and I told him get a blended because I was working with the team, so I kind of said you should take a blended learning course. So I saw him managing very good with the assignments, and he said, oh, I don't have to go to school today. I need to do my work, and he used to do the work at the same time, but it depends on also the student. In terms of teachers, some might think is easier because they have might think that they requires the same amount of time to design as a regular course, but it's not. It really demands to think about how to blend both words and how will be a meaningful experience for the students. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Candace. My daughter goes to Dawson College and is currently she's taken two different kinds of modalities since she started in CEGEP last semester. One was a condensed class, and the other one that she's taking now is a blended class. And what's interesting is watching my daughter navigate it versus my thinking about how my son would navigate it and how different they are in terms of how they approach their school lives, how they manage their time, how they organize their lives in terms of everything from like their friends to their work to their schoolwork to all of those things. And I think my daughter's an example of someone who is very well suited to blended learning because she likes to have the flexibility to organize her own time and manage her own learning. I know that my son would not be that student. So I think that that's interesting. Like there's a certain kind of student. I mean, to be fair though, I think my daughter would do well in all modalities. She's a good student who takes herself very seriously as a student, and I think that that's true of all classes. If you have a student who's self-aware and mature and confident, they are the student who's going to do well regardless of the modality. I tend to think of my own blended learning class as being what if my son was in my class? And I think that's a different way of understanding and thinking about how you approach your pedagogy in a classroom. I actually do that in my regular classes now too, because he's approaching almost CEGEP age as well. So it's a complicated way to answer that question. But as a parent, with a child now in CEGEP, it's remarkable how much that's changed how I understand my own teaching in my classrooms.
Thank you.
Yeah, from a parent's perspective, I think there's still a lot of skepticism. I do think that there's some, learning that still needs to happen. I mean, I know my son who's now finished Abbott and went through during the pandemic, who's now at Concordia and has run from any online class because his experience online, not that Abbott, they all did a fantastic job, but it really impacted him, to learn Latin that way. It didn't work for him. But my question was more about sort of, because you mentioned that some students, are surprised by the workload. And we are hearing already sort of rumblings about equity when it comes to these kinds of classes, in terms of the students' workload, the equity in the classes. Because I've looked at some blended learning course outlines, of course, and I look at them and it's how you sort of manage those homework hours and those asynchronous class hours and keep it in a reasonable amount, taking into consideration students like Candace's son and also the 8 other courses that they're taking. I'm just like, that's a big question, but these are things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, it needs to be clarified with the students who might think that because they have asynchronous and they were assigned work, they feel that it's too much, but it might not be too much because they're not coming in class. But from the course perspective as well, we need to keep working on it to make sure that the ponderation is respected. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Hi. Sorry. Hi, I'm Michelle. So just with the ponderation, during the pandemic, I was doing a blended approach, but all virtually. And I found that I was only really able to get through about 2/3 of my content in any given time. Do you find with the John Abbott students, so the teachers, that you're able to get through less content in the same period of time when it's a blended approach, as opposed to purely face-to-face? I'm an English second language teacher, but I work in education. I work with the student teachers. So it was the pedagogy courses. Yeah.
English? You teach English?
Second language.
Second. I didn't hear when they bring the course outline, the teachers, they cover the same content. That maybe, yeah, I was thinking about Valerie.
So I teach English as the first language literature. We always run out of time for synchronous classes. Our discussions could go on for a lot longer, but I have to take into account the fact that when the students do their asynchronous activities where they write, and it's exactly what Andrea described. It's deeper. They can practice argumentation in ways that we cannot do in the classroom because they don't have that time to think and really work on their writing. So it's also for the teacher to shift their mindset about what's my responsibility in terms of coverage, and is it okay if the students learn it by themselves? And that's another kind of attitude shift that is challenging with blended. And I think to answer your question, is a big misconception that if the teacher's not doing anything, they're not working. But in fact, you also compensate with the amount of feedback you give, and that's a big big job for blended in English and probably in humanities as well.
Hi, Krista. I'm from Champlain College on the South Shore with Erin, and we're one of these strange disciplines that teaches blended learning just for curiosity purposes. We're in phys ed, and we've been using it for 3 years, and we love it. I'm also on our blended learning transformational learning, oh my God, lead team. There's too many acronyms, but the committee with Diane Bateman at Champlain. And we've done a lot of focus groups with the students and teachers over the last couple of years. And one of the ones we did last winter, we were starting to notice that students that were in more blended learning courses, so students that had more than, say, 3 blended learning courses per semester, it seemed like it was a bit of a challenge for them. And I'm just wondering if that's the case at Abbott, to your knowledge, or if it's something that has come up in discussions.
You mean a challenge?
Like, say they have
what?
like 8 courses, and 3 or 4 of their courses, 3 or 4 of them are blended learning.
So challenge, you mean academically or?
Potentially, yeah, academically, just any time. Yeah, that was one of the things we noticed. The ones that were in more, the time management became or they were stating that it was definitely more challenging to manage their time, getting their work done. I can't speak to their grades, but just their experience.
From the last report that we did, they was comparing grades in the different semesters. They were the difference was similar between grades in blended but no blended. But we don't have, like you said, many courses. I don't know how many courses you have.
I think we have around 70 teachers using.
Oh.
We have a pretty large amount using it.
Okay, we have this semester, we have 18 teachers, which are 38 sections.
Okay, we have.
So I think you have more.
A little bit more, yeah.
More to compare. Yeah.
Just something interesting to consider.
Yeah. And you do phys ed blended.
Yeah.
How?
Oh, how much time do you have? No, we took the master teacher program blended learning course, I guess at the onset of the pandemic, and decided to try it out when we were online, and we loved it. It made so much sense from our subject, which is very based on developing lifelong physical activity habits, autonomy, managing your time, and lots of reflection and journaling. And it just, like, that social aspect, the teaching aspect, the cognitive aspect, it aligned very well with what we're doing for, I would say, 75% of our courses. We've stepped back and looked at the type of courses we offer, and ones that are more fitness-based, or the 103, our autonomy course, are very, very well suited to it. We like our classes the challenges, our classes are once a week for 2 hours. So when you have an asynchronous class, you might, and then, holidays and stuff, you might not see them for a few weeks. So that adds to the challenge. But from a curriculum standpoint and pedagogy standpoint, we have made it work. There's 3 of us that do it, and I would never go back. The one main difference, just noticing from your PowerPoint, and I was looking at our blended learning guidelines at Champlain, is we don't actually, it's the digital part isn't necessarily a main focus of our definition of blended learning. It's in the, like, it could be encouraged to use, but it's not mandatory to use, or it's not like a main part of it. So that's sort of the part where phys ed maybe doesn't align with the digital part, but from a design standpoint with the community of inquiry, it's a beautiful match.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Erin. I work with Krista. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, Michelle. You were asking about, do you have enough time? So the way we look at it, we look at ponderation as total course hours. So I'm no longer looking at, I have 30 hours in class and 15 hours of homework. I look at my course as 45 hours and I build from there. So in the 45 hours, we use blocks in our teaching. So each of my blocks needs to add up at the end of the day to the 45 hours with both the synchronous and asynchronous time. So yes, I have enough time for everything. It just depends how I'm going to then build that. Does that help a little bit? That makes sense? Yeah. I have to say, if anyone has not taken the Master Teachers Program course, it's incredible. It's really great. And you also, it's a summer course, so, or at least I took it in the summer. I don't think everyone does that. But I left there with my course planned, right? So it is a lot of work to do, but once you finish it, you've thought it all through, you're ready to go. So my course was planned, and then I had to do the other thing, the same thing for my other levels of courses, but I had an idea of exactly what I need to do and where I wanted to go. And you did that in a supported environment, right? With colleagues and with Diane teaching it. So it's super helpful. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea, so much for your presentation. I know there are a few more questions, so we'll be posting a QR code up on the screen. If there's anything you think of that you would like to have answered, go ahead, type it in there, and we'll address it when we come back. We're going to take a short wellness break, and we'll see you all back for our next presentation at 2:45. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Now that we have a collective understanding of the concept of blended learning, I'll soon be inviting Candace Steenbergen and Valerie Baer to present some of their recent research findings. A quick introduction before I pass the mic over. Valerie has been teaching in the English department at John Abbott since 2015. She has a master's degree in English from Carleton and the University of Minnesota. Currently, she is working on her Master's of Education at the Université de Sherbrooke, focusing on the use of writing strategies in French and English in the context of the Épreuve uniforme de français in Anglophone colleges. She's also a Saltese Fellow. Her interest in blended learning began during the pandemic when she worked as a faculty resource person for online teaching, and she has since taught a blended learning English class every fall semester. Candace has an interdisciplinary background in critical theory, politics, and the media, and has been a faculty member in the Humanities, Philosophy, Religion department at John Abbott College for 15 years. She earned her PhD in Interdisciplinary Humanities at Concordia, an MA in Canadian Studies, Cultural Studies, Gender Studies at Carleton, and a double BA in Canadian Studies and Politics at Brock. Her teaching and research focus on theory, discourse, power, and more recently on play and maker spaces as sites of learning. The pandemic got her thinking of the use and impact of new teaching modalities for students and teachers in institutions of higher education. And she is currently teaching a course on epistemology in a blended learning format. Candace and Valerie, I invite you to come up.
Thank you. Okay, I heard basketball-sized area. Okay. Thank you, Amanda. Welcome, everyone. We are going to tell you about a research project that we conducted in 22, 23, so last year. It feels like a long time ago, which we are calling, and I'm sorry, I can't, can I see the? Okay, yeah. Set up here. Okay. So it's about the student experience. Here we go. Like, this is real. Student experiences of blended learning in a post-COVID context. and we are going to share some of our results. And should be able to hit the space bar. Oh, here. Okay. But first, I want to introduce our collaborators. This was an intercollegiate project, so we worked with Diane Bateman at Champlain College and as well her blended learning team. Also Anne-Marie Lafortune in Gaspésie and Murray Brunette in chemistry at John Abbott. So they also participated in the project. And let's talk about what that project was with Candace. You can go.
Oh, there we go. So Valerie and I started talking about, Valerie and I started talking about blended learning in the post-COVID context. Actually, I think we started talking to other people first about blended learning in a post-COVID context and just talking about teaching and learning online. A lot of those conversations between and among teachers had been happening about what was it like to teach online, what were some of the struggles, what were some of the things that we were thinking, and then returning back to class as members of the pedagogical team, the faculty pedagogical team, and then talking to other teachers about what it was like to teach when we came back and how students were responding to things that we used to do versus all of the learning that we had done during COVID. Many of us took so many trainings, online classes, trying to sort of change the way that we understood pedagogy in different kinds of formats. So a lot of what we started doing when we put this research grant together or the application together was thinking about how things had shifted, and they had shifted quite a bit. COVID changed a lot in terms of how we were responding to our students in the class, how they were responding to us, how we understood our teaching. I apologize, I'm coming off of a cold, so I'm hoping it's gonna hold out. So part of the research came from just having conversations with colleagues and from different departments, from different institutions, friends teaching at university level and at the CEGEP level, and then a bunch of it came from research that we had done. Pre-COVID research studies on blended learning. I mean, blended learning isn't new, right? It's been around for quite some time as a modality. But the studies prior to COVID were mostly quantitative. So they were studies that were asking students like rank this on a level of, very much to not at all. The 5-point scale, they were very much about how can we implement this? Can this be implemented? And they had a very specific focus. Oftentimes it was about, this is a feasible modality and here's how it could be understood as something that would be worthwhile in a classroom. Oftentimes they were university. There was very little actually about blended learning at the CEGEP level. And oftentimes it was about convincing departmental administration that this was a good idea. So it was really talking about to the administration in terms of what advantages it could potentially have as a modality. Then COVID happened. And COVID learning sort of amped up the qualitative in a particular kind of way. But what we were really seeing was more quantitative, rank how you felt you learned online, rank this, rank that, which is great. And it has there's a lot of place for that kind of research. The research that was happening about COVID learning, though, was very much about and focusing on pedagogy within the context of sort of emergency online teaching. It's a very specific and very particular kind of way of understanding teaching and learning. And emergency remote online teaching was not what we were doing post-COVID. So it was a whole area of research that didn't quite talk about what it was we were doing. And oftentimes it talked about blended learning in high schools. Many schools did the bubbles where you went in one day and you had your bubbled class and then you were offline doing asynchronous work the second day and then back in class. So blended learning in Quebec and Ontario had become sort of the way in which that emergency teaching had been done, a way of getting students back in the classroom and a way of sort of creating spaces that were safer in terms of numbers in the classroom and so on. A lot of that research was specifically looking at student satisfaction, motivation, and whether or not there was a desire for face-to-face. And a lot of the research did say, yes, there was a real desire to go back face-to-face. And then there's research that happened post-lockdown, and this is us. This is what is the experience of students and teachers? And I know Valerie and I had a lot of conversations talking about, okay, we have all these stats, but
how do people feel about this? What are the actual experiences? What were people saying? How did they feel? What were the stories? And so we were imagining a project that actually involved speaking with people, speaking with teachers, speaking with students, and having those conversations about what was it like? How did you feel? Tell us about your experiences as a student with this modality. And so what's also interesting is at that time, there was an increased interest in blended learning as a modality post-COVID among various CEGEPs. And what we were seeing is that there was a desire for sort of the best of both. We had come out of a time and a space where a lot of teachers had learned new pedagogies, and we were like desperately desiring to sort of try this stuff out in our new post-COVID classrooms. So we had an opportunity, and we saw an opportunity as well. So what this ultimately led to is our research question, which is what are the experiences of blended learning of teachers and students in a post-COVID context? What are the experiences? So this is where we began. And Andrea, you had that wonderful, complicated slide on what blended learning is. And Valerie and I, when we started our project, decided to strip it down and have the most simple version of what constituted blended learning, knowing full well that we know how complex and complicated this actually is. So our question around what is blended learning, that we could sort of, it provided the fulcrum upon which the rest of the project moved, was a definition that said, blended learning is a course in which a portion of in-class hours are replaced with asynchronous activities. Point for that.
Okay. Of course, that the beauty of that definition is that it allows us to look at many different models that present themselves in different ways and include other modalities as well. So we did work with 3 CEGEPs. So the first one was Cégep de la Gaspésie et des Îles. Although Gaspé has an English sector, here we conducted interviews on the French side. We worked with 2 different programs. So technique juridique, so what do we do? Like paralegal technology, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, sorry. And aquaculture, so like the program where they learn how to breed fish at EPAC. So obviously, if you know a little bit about Gaspé, it's a very remote area. They struggle with enrollment. And so in their case, blended learning was something that they developed prior to COVID because of enrollment challenges in order to make these very technical programs accessible to the entire province of Quebec, particularly in the case of aquaculture. It's the only program in Quebec. And so without blended learning, it would die and it would not exist. But I think when we spoke with them, they also emphasized that the exercise of teaching online during COVID really impacted their practices. And so they are still part of our post-COVID context. In addition, they try everything. They have all the modalities in the world because they have some international students that are on site. So they can have sometimes co-modal classes for their gen eds. They could have gen eds with like Ile de la Madeleine or something. So like they also have entirely remote. In the case of l'EPAC, they do face-to-face and an intensive program. So the students come for about a week and then they do like on-site, like really hands-on activities, like going out on boats and things like that they wouldn't be able to do online. For technique juridique, it's effectively a distance learning program, but we included them in our study because it's a distance learning that has both a face-to-face, not a face-to-face, sorry, a synchronous and an asynchronous component. Then we heard a little bit already about our other institution that we worked with at Champlain St. Lambert. So I think Krista earlier shared some of the distinctive features of Champlain, which is that they have a lot of local expertise in blended learning and also a lot of teachers who are interested. They're a bit smaller in terms of student numbers than John Abbott. So that's why I call them mid-sized. I think from what our discussions, something that is interesting at Champlain is that blended learning is open to all. So it's really the teacher's choice, unlike Gaspé, where sort of material conditions sort of force them to teach online. At Champlain is really a choice. And then our third institution is John Abbott. And since we've heard a lot about it from Andrea's presentation, I'm just going to move on to the next slide.
So, I'll talk a little bit about our project and the methodology. As we said, we wanted to do qualitative research as opposed to quantitative. And again, this came from a lot of the insights that we had as FORPs and with the blended learning community. And that there was a lot of sort of experience pre-research, and then those insights sort of led us to creating the kinds of research questions that we ended up pursuing. So our research was qualitative. We did interviews, qualitative interviews on a one-on-one basis. We also conducted focus groups. It was on a voluntary basis, both for teachers and for students. We had 13 questions in both the student and teacher questionnaires, and they mirrored each other. And they had lots of freedom to expand, to dig deeper. We often sort of prompted further conversations after the questions were answered. Sometimes people just offered a lot more. And we had 10 hours total of recorded interview at the end. And so what we did was a coding process. We put it all in a machine and created transcripts of the audio recordings. And then each transcript was reviewed by a minimum of 2 people. And then we coded for experience, not outcomes. So we were looking for those nuggets of information that came from the stories, as opposed to looking for how many times someone mentioned a phenomenon. So I mean, some of the questions that we asked were literally like, what did you do with your time? How did you spend your asynchronous hours? How did your teachers enable that? Or if it was a teacher, like, how do you enable students to do their work in an asynchronous context? So it was very loose in that regard, intentionally, because we wanted to get those stories much more organically.
Okay, so again, we have a spoiler alert here, but this is also something that you heard in the previous presentation. Experiences are varied. Like, you won't find a definitive answer. Should you do blended learning? Yes or no? Is it effective for everyone? Those questions, you will not find an answer here. So we'll instead talk a little bit about different themes that emerged as we looked at the results. Something to say perhaps is that the students that we spoke to, most of them had a positive experience, but of course, maybe there's a bit of a selection bias there because, if you had a good experience, you want to talk about it. That said, our students were definitely willing to question and critique their experiences. So it was by no means a 100% positive. Even students who loved it had criticisms or had caveats that they wanted to bring to us. So the themes that we're gonna move through today are the following. I just quite can't see them. So we kind of try to go from the students learning. No, there's something else before that.
Yeah.
They're basically their experiences with asynchronous time. Like, what do they do? How do they learn and what perhaps do they learn? Maybe we're not focusing on content here, unfortunately. That was something that was hard to get from the students. Like, how do you actually learn material? We're also going to talk about the social aspect and the relationship between the students and the teachers and what they expect there. Their relationship to the environment. So how do they deal with space? And finally, we're going to talk briefly about the teacher experience as well and what we got from especially our interviews at Gaspé, since they gave us a lot of their time to talk about their institutional structure and the kind of collaboration they experienced there.
So one of the big questions that a lot of people have, and we even saw with the discussion that we had earlier, was like, what do students do during their asynchronous time? How do you ensure that they're doing the things that they need to do during their asynchronous time, et cetera? So we asked them, what do you do during your asynchronous time? If you have a class on Tuesday morning from 8:30 to 10:30, what are you doing? Some of them indeed are sleeping. But many students said they did things like they saved time on commuting. So instead of, getting up and getting ready and getting dressed and going all the way down to Abbott to take, the train or the bus or however what they got there, they were saving time. So they were getting up, having a breakfast and working. Some of them, yes, sleep, time to relax. Recuperation was a word, recuperating from their day, pre-recuperating, pre-recuperating. They said that they were reorganizing their work schedule so they could work in big chunks. That was an interesting, actually, finding that we found out that our students like to do their work in sort of bulk. They like to have that chunk of time where they can do X number of assignments or they can do that much reading. I think it was quite fascinating actually to hear this from students that they like the big chunks of time, even though oftentimes we tell them, if you have half an hour, take that half an hour and do X, Y, and Z. Nope, they like the chunks. They like to bundle, I think is the word that was used. They like to bundle their assignments. Students set priorities and it depended on what, it differed over time. It changed in terms of week to week, in terms of what their necessities were and what they needed to do and what they needed to focus on. Some students used, believe it or not, their asynchronous time to work on their asynchronous work. And actually, students who are highly regimented in terms of their self-regulation tended to do that. I have my 2 hours, I'm going to do my work during those 2 hours. It's already in my schedule, so I might as well use it. Some students used it to pursue other passions, which I think is interesting as well. Being with their families, meeting a friend for coffee, being social, even doing, literally doing other things that made them happy during their day, which I think is quite fascinating also. On the whole, though, what was pretty consistent is that blended learning seemed to, in some way, it was described by different students in different ways, but they said that it alleviated their stress, that it gave them a pause and a little bit of time to make a decision about how they were going to spend that time.
There's an asterisk to that.
Yes, there
because
is.
we're going to talk some more about that.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see even in the relatively small sample of students that we surveyed that we got such varied experiences and varied life realities. And so we've done this throughout the presentation. We've added some of the quotes from our interviews just to get it from the student's voice. So on the left-hand side, you have a quote in French from a student whose mother is in a wheelchair. And so for her, the experience of being online or being in a blended format allows her to take some of the responsibilities for childcare and supporting her family. And then on the other side, we have, something that we hear a lot, I think, in all of our contexts, it's the students' workload, how many courses they have. And so having to be able to take some time out of class time, I think, to just really focus on the work and feeling like that's a relief from a stress management perspective.
And also an interesting response, a series of responses that we got was this reality that, or this realization that blended learning sort of threw students into the process of metacognition. Students' responses to a very large extent reminded us that this is a process of students learning how to learn. And it's a process that needs to be modeled, and we have to prioritize certain things like communication in order to help them learn the process of learning. We are going to talk about this again as well. So we found that blended learning provided a context for metacognition. And it did allow students to recognize this process. They could see themselves being engaged or having to be engaged in order to get certain outcomes or to actually move from one sequence to another, unit to another. Students show awareness of their need to organize time and to set priorities, prepare their weeks and prepare their days and semesters. And they have to because you have to, or else you will fall through the cracks of blended learning. You need to be on top of and self-regulate. We also found out that students want agency over their time. And I think it's telling that we found out that students didn't feel like they had much agency over their time. And I think that tells us something as well. There was an expression of annoyance when they were too closely monitored. There was an expectation of being able to use their asynchronous time however they saw fit. If they have an asynchronous class time, if they have 2 hours or 3 hours, that was their time to do with what they wish. If it says that it's a flexible time, they wanted to be able to use that in a flexible manner. There was a desire for them to work at optimal times, which, my optimal is different than your optimal, which is different than your optimal. And again, this sort of highlights the awareness of a need to manage their own self in the best way that they could see fit. And at the same time, students wanted accountability. They wanted mechanisms in place. They wanted deadlines. They wanted to know when there was a sense of urgency, because those prompts also actually helped facilitate metacognition. So ultimately, and what comes from this is that it's a process, and that they need to have and express a desire to have the time to learn how to do it. What this looks like pedagogically is quite interesting, and can look, I think we can talk about this as well, but they have to learn how to be able to fail, to how to do it better, etc. It's the process. We have another quote.
Yeah. And just to say, when we say it's metacognition here, this is why I said it's hard to get them to talk about content. So the learning that they do about their learning is not necessarily about how to learn in a class, like learning class material, but more learning how to organize and manage their time. And so you can see here from our quote, they use that language, which is kind of fascinating. Like, you kind of need to be self-directed and choose your learning. But they also recognize it doesn't work for everyone, and they watch, their classmates, and they realize that perhaps some people need to be in school mode, and the only way to be in school mode is to be physically in school, and others, they understand when school mode needs to happen, and they're able to make it happen at home or in a different environment. So they have to recognize this phrase school mode is really like, it really sounds like they're setting their brain into, right now it's time for work, it's time for learning. And we're going to show you a little, we tried to illustrate that for the students. So one of the goals of the project was not only to do some research, but also create some resources for people. And one of the things we wanted to do after we saw these results is to normalize that process for students. And to that end, unfortunately, we only have the first drawing realized, but we tried to create like a little comic that you could hand into students and show, like, look, it's okay if you realize if you're not keeping up with the class, but you have to realize what's going to happen if you go down this path. And we also, the quote just below is a screenshot from our analysis software, in which a student, I can't see, but basically she tells the story of how because if you submit things on Teams or something, you see when people are posting, and they realized they were all posting really close to midnight. And when they told that story during the interview, they all started laughing. And it was like clearly this shared experience of near failure that they all learned from. And that was kind of an illuminating moment for us of like students, they went as far as the line, they toed the line, and then they walked back and they realized maybe that process isn't working well for me. I need to change. And so over time, they realized I don't have to submit my asynchronous assignment at the very last minute. I can do it 2 days earlier. And it just kind of, you could see the learning happening.
And just to mention, the drawing is done by one of the John Abbott College art students. Yeah. It will be done soon. Yeah. So how do students negotiate blended learning? This was a tricky one to make, actually, because we didn't want to create categories or labels and like place them on students. It didn't make much sense, but we did see some themes emerge in terms of the kinds of attitudes that some students have. And many students have multiple of these, right, simultaneously. So we have 4: organized, confident, passive or reactive, and euphoric. The organized student has a very sort of mental picture of their schedule. They anticipate optimal times. They know they're morning learners or they're better, after supper. They know when it's good to study, when it's good to learn, when it's good to practice, when it's, resting time. Usually those kids have gym schedules and that sort of thing as well. They have part-time jobs that they negotiate. And basically students gain power and momentum and motivation from this kind of ability. And they succeed when they see themselves succeeding and they can check off those boxes. Many learn to become organized. There's type. They become too organized from going through trial and error. And so the organized students they can see themselves in the process of learning as they're doing it, largely because a lot of them either mentally they're thinking it through and reorganizing from week to week or class to class, or they've got a log themselves. There's a confident student who takes to blended learning quite quickly. Their motivation may dip towards the end once they feel as though they've got this locked down and they're in control. And they are very practiced at self-direction and self-motivation. Again, passive or confident and organized sometimes go hand in hand. I'm going to go to euphoric just for a second and talk a little bit about euphoric students who discover a passion or a talent of learning that they actually really start to enjoy either the content that they're teaching or the ways in which they're going about their learning through the modality. There's something about the process of doing blended learning that gives them a space for that. And blended learning sort of redefines their experiences of or opinion of school. This is an interesting one also because these are students who are like, I thought I didn't like X, Y, and Z, and actually I really do. And I thought I was a bad student, and actually I'm not. So this is an interesting one as well. And then there's the passive/reactive one. And I don't know, I always wonder if this has something to do with the fact that we teach in gen ed. That we read this one in a very particular kind of way. But the student who might not take asynchronous work as seriously as they probably should, students who think of it as sort of a get out of jail free card, those students who are like, oh, I only have to go to school half the time. And they often need an extrinsic consequence. So they have to get some zeros. They have to, realize that when they come into an asynchronous class, folks are prepared and they're not, or they're a little bit confused. And sometimes, I mean, these again, like they all overlap. Students are not, they're not labels. But oftentimes these students need to have a little bit of a reaction in order to change their habits and get on track. It's all part of it. And of course, yeah, it's all context based. Oftentimes it depends on the student, depends on their goals, depends on, what they want to get out of the class. And it depends on the content, the teacher, all of those things. Yeah, it's gonna get. There we go.
Yes. So context-based is really important there because I think you could take a student who exhibits one attitude in one class, ship them in a different one with a different system, and then they would be a totally kind of like a different kind of student. And a lot of that is because of, at least in the student's mind, how they frame it is their teacher. So although you could say it's the course design, it's not the teacher. For the students, when they express it in interviews, it's my teacher did this, my teacher did that. What did my teacher do? This teacher did this. So like it's really when they articulate their experiences, it's through the teacher. So the teacher kind of becomes the metonym for the entire course. And for everyone that thinks blended learning is a way for teachers to disappear and not support their students, if you do that, no one is going to have a good blended learning experience, because I would say the more you remove the teacher from these, like in terms of having asynchronous hours, the more students actually they crave that presence. So in some ways it is like the community of inquiry. And the teacher is the kind of enabler of the wonderful things that can happen with blended learning in terms of their learning, the metacognition that we talked about. So what can the teacher do? The teacher enables the possibility of that learning through very basic things like having a clear schedule, organizing the course in a way that makes sense to the students, being accessible and supportive. And I just realized I totally took over your slide. Okay. And facilitating social experiences, which we'll see. You could do the other one instead. Sure. So what happens when teachers do that? They have increased motivation. They discover, something about themselves. They are happy, they make friends in the course, and they are also have lower stress. So that's why we had the asterisk at the beginning.
Yeah, I think the fact that students really have shown, the students that we've spoken to have really shown that they really do want and they need their teachers present to set parameters, to create brackets around things, to be that support, to be the person who helps facilitate their learning, to give them feedback across the board. Students said this. Yeah.
For example.
So for example, there's an awful lot of text on that. Threats to motivation. Students who felt like their asynchronous tasks were overloaded, that when they were not in class, one of the threats to motivation was that the teacher had given them too much work, or they felt as though there was too much work to do. They felt overloaded, and ponderation or not, they felt as though they had hours and hours more work to do when they were not in an asynchronous class. The second big motivator, and Valerie had just spoken about the role of the teacher and how fundamental the teacher is in a blended learning course and the success of a blended learning course. Pretty consistently across the board, teachers who didn't respond to students are teachers who weren't available to students when they reached out and asked for assistance. Huge, tremendous hindrance or threat to motivation. I love actually how that student put it. Yeah. I botched a couple of things because she wouldn't make herself available. Like that's, students, I mean, I would also argue that that's a really good example of metacognition, that a student is realizing that I needed help and I wasn't able to access it. Had I had help, I would have been able to do this thing. Also, the exacerbation of a cognitive load. The idea that students say, like, the material is not difficult, it's just how the course was set up that was more stressful for me. And again, this goes back to what Valerie was saying about the role of the teacher and how creating a course that makes sense, that has a progression or a trajectory that follows one after the other, going back to things that you do from an asynchronous class and bring it into a synchronous class, showing that there's that overlap between what you do outside of class versus what you do, and making it all link, because otherwise the cognitive load actually gets a little bit too much. It becomes a little bit too stressful. And finally, students said that sometimes the lack of motivation came from feeling as though they didn't have a social connection. So again, it goes back to a teacher's role and a teacher's presence, enabling the facilitation of those kinds of collective, collaborative assignments, making sure students are working together, making sure that they feel that they're part of a community of learners in that classroom, that they feel that they're part of a classroom, and that their relationship with the teacher and their relationships with each other matter, and that it becomes a fundamental part of their learning. I almost want to pause on this. Are you good? These are good. These are great quotes. That's why. We have more. We do have more. Here we go.
So what else can you do? Like, other than the things you shouldn't do, what else can you do? I think if you have a good reason for teaching blended and you make that explicit to the students, they tend to appreciate it. So we have here an example of a course where the teacher explained that the reason for blended learning was to allow shy students who feel social anxiety, to participate, because otherwise in a sort of discussion-based class, oftentimes you don't hear many voices. Another student talked about a kind of informal communication space that the teacher had set up online. So that student really appreciated the fact that not only was the teacher present, but it was a different kind of teacher-student relationship that worked better. So less formal, where they could have fun, do jokes, put memes online, that kind of thing. And then similarly to what we just discussed, of course, if they want social interaction, social connection, providing class time for connection is really important. And so I think a lot of, if we think about the difference between COVID online learning and post-COVID blended learning, one of the key differences is that when we were online, there was no socialization opportunities at all. Whereas now, and this is what one of the students expresses, with a blended learning, you're almost looking forward to go to class because that's when you get to see your classmates. And that is a big, big difference from online learning.
And we have to talk about the notion of space. Space is a tricky concept. in class, asynchronously or synchronously. The space impacts motivation and success, what kind of space you create and how you facilitate it and how you maintain it. Not all students have the equipment that we think they might have. This is a big one, right? Okay, thank you. So recognizing that not all students are the same in terms of their access to things. So this is an important one, so that if you're expecting students to do something that requires them to be online, yes, you can put on the top of it, yes, you have to have it required, but it's actually really important to recognize that there are limitations to this, and some students will not have access. Also, the student or the school itself may not have facilities available to students to work optimally in asynchronous settings. For example, being in a private space or having reliable internet, or even just having spaces where they can sit and do group work together in a way that is, comfortable and private. Space is structure and school is schoolwork, and computer oftentimes is a leisure space for students. And this is a really important thing for us to think about. And so sometimes if you have your work and your school and your space and your computer game and your friends and all of those things on that same machine, we have to think about how time or space operates within the context of that. I think it's true of all of us as well. Multiple tabs, multiple things, chats, and those things put together. And the classroom itself is sort of a physical reminder of the material. So we can think about how space operates both in these asynchronous and synchronous spaces, and seeing the overlap, not just between what is in school or in class and not in class, but also what is virtual, what is, technological, what is, social in a very particular kind of way, and what is social in real life. And I think it's very important for us to realize that students live in a multiplicity of modalities in their everyday lives. Sometimes it's on their phone, sometimes it's on their computer, sometimes it's in a classroom, and we need to be hyper aware of that because it can impact motivation and success. Asynchronous work can also favor concentration, and I think this is an important one as well. Students reporting that sometimes doing work in class can be hard when there's 44 students in the class with you, and that when you're asynchronous, sometimes you have a space to create the space that allows for focus and allows for concentration in ways that are otherwise. This is a wonderful quote from one of the students that we spoke with. They said, sometimes I have a hard time focusing in a room with a lot of people. This course in particular has many, many assignments or many steps within one assignment, which I think also added to a little bit of confusion. So for me, it was great to sometimes just be able to bundle things together in a quiet space or switch up the location if I wanted to, and not be at a computer in a classroom being uncomfortable. So again, spaces, it's a tricky one to talk about, but I think it's something, even in non-blended learning classrooms, pedagogically, I think it's something that we need to be considering.
Yeah, I think it reinforces what Andrea was saying earlier about it's not necessarily about one over the other, but more how they blend, literally how we make the most out of both sites or both contexts. So the final, I think, finding is really more from what the teachers gain or what the teacher's experience is. And so this is also a learning process for teachers. And so here, I think we have French. So at Gaspé, they were working on it as a team because they were building also their programs in that modality and selling sorry, I shouldn't say that, promoting that modality for enrollment. And so they all had to be on board. And so here they just talk about how their team sort of held each other. And, at the end, it's like, yeah, it's scary. Yeah, maybe you don't like computers, but at the end of the day, we're all, going to hold each other by the hand and do it together. So it's a little cheesy, but I think we were impressed with their teamwork.
We were downright inspired by their teamwork.
Yeah. And so just to talk about, how does this develop? And again, from Gaspé, we have these examples. So they attended, I think they said, by the time we were done taking all the workshops that were being offered, we could have taught them. They knew everything. They were always trying out different tools and trading information. They sought expertise from other institutions as well. Like they just really pulled from the network and trying to figure out like who knows anything about this tool or that strategy. They also brought in the student services. Ultimately, of course, they're working at a distance, but they realized things like support for students in crisis, for example. They had no structure there to help students who were at a distance. And so it's really showing how it can be not just a faculty-based endeavor, but also a college-wide one. And then on a more sort of program level for the program, for example, they designed their teams all in the same way. So the students, as they go from course to course, they know where to go, and they shared their best practices. They meet frequently. They have release, etc.
And now we're nearing the end. Where do students and teachers need support? From the research findings that we found, students really wanted us, or there seemed to be an expressed desire by students to normalize the learning curve of blended learning, to know that they had to understand it, that they lived it, that they wanted us to understand the struggle and that they lived it and to learn from it. And I think this is a big one in terms of thinking about the learning curve. Students don't jump into a blended learning class and then boom, they know how to do it. There's a lot of sort of figuring it out, and there's a little bit of confusion and a lot of question asking, and that's part of the process, and it's okay because that actually helps with metacognition in the grander scheme. And it actually renders pedagogy transparent, which I think is also very good for students. For teachers need to be aware of the aspects of a course design that threatens students' motivation and come together to develop solutions to these potential problems. Again, this is true for blended learning and not, that these are really important things for us to think about as teachers. And we should also be sensitized to the need for very clear and consistent communication. You say you're going to be somewhere, be there. And if you're going to say you're going to answer in a certain technology, answer in that technology.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of developing these infographics for students and for teachers. So we want it to be super accessible, easy to understand, and kind of quick as well. So it's not developing a course, it's just like a thing that you can give to your students or you can give to your colleagues. So, this is just one example of our comparison between emergency remote teaching and blended learning, and emphasizing the differences. But we have many other ones that are in the process of being developed or illustrated.
Are done by a graphic and web design student from John Abbott College, who's very, very talented. We are really lucky to have such awesome students.
Yeah. So if you have any questions or you want to get in touch with us for whatever reason, you have our contact info here. And we can go.
I'll go back. There we go.
Thank you so much, Valerie and Candace.
Oh, sorry. I just have a couple more shout outs, and primarily to not only the collaborators we discussed, but also actually the blended learning team at Champlain who also participated and supported us. And also our funding came from ECQ. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think there are a couple aha moments just based on the number of flash photography that happened during the session. So that's awesome. Just keeping an eye on time. We're going to take a short break, 15 minutes. We'll put the QR code back up and we'll return. We're starting with a short question period. So if you have any questions at all, hold on to them and we'll get to them. So we'll reconvene at 3:45. Thank you. So I'll start by seeing if there are any questions for Candace and Valerie. You don't have to type them in if you want to just raise your hand. And then if we don't have any from the audience, we'll go to the board.
So I just have a question about the space issue. One of the things about blended learning, it's supposed to make things more flexible, including students being able to sleep in the morning and so on. However, sometimes with the schedule, their blended learning course might be in the middle of the day. And at John Abbott and at Dawson and probably other English CEGEPs, there's a real shortage of student space. So I'm just wondering if you could give I don't know what the situation is at Gaspé in terms of that experience. So there's a sort of paradox. It's supposed to make things more flexible, and be online, but the thing that is constraining it is that old space issue, which is bricks and mortar. So can you talk a little bit about the complexity that of students' experience when they're at the college? They have to find a space. Does that impinge on the effectiveness of blended learning in a serious way? Is it a really important limiting factor? I don't know. So I have a question for you too, Andrea, but let's leave it on the space issue for now. And you can jump in on that one too.
Well, I think what's interesting about that is that your classroom isn't double booked. So if you meet twice a week in a classroom or two different classrooms, when your class is not meeting synchronously, that room is open. And so my students often take that space. I'm like, this is your classroom. This classroom belongs to you as long as you're not, making a mess, as long as you're not doing work. Very few students, I'll be honest though, very few students take you up on it. There's always two, maybe four if they're working on a project, and they only spend a partial part of the time, but they'll use it if the fourth floor of Hertzberg is full or if the library is a little bit loud. They don't often take you up on the space, but they do have access to their classroom, which is nice. Students actually, a lot of students that have reported that they would prefer to go somewhere else, that they like to meet in a cafe. They like to meet somewhere that is not at school. So sometimes the brick and mortar can facilitate other kinds of spaces, and it can open up spaces that maybe they haven't. I know in St. Anne's, there's a local library that students have used also, but it's a different kind of learning space. They still have access to the computer. Not all students have found out about it, so that's also good too, so they can use that space. Sometimes they go to a collective, like a little cafe that's local. Sometimes they meet at each other's places, and sometimes they meet virtually, so they stay at home and work. But the tricky thing, if you have for instance, I teach a class that's from 10:30 to 12:30, and oftentimes students have classes at 8. So what do they do with those times? Actually, what I've heard is that sometimes they're studying for their next test. So if they have a class at 2:30 and they're doing a lab or they're doing something like that, they'll work and find a space at the library and that sort of thing to work on what it is they're doing next, and then spend time doing your asynchronous work somewhere else.
Just from a Champlain perspective, they actually online asynchronous classes are not allowed generally unless they're in a program that is small enough and specific enough. So for example, tourism, where it's a very small cohort of students that would have all the same classes from like say 8 to 12. In that case, they could have an online asynchronous, but for the rest of the disciplines, we're not generally allowed to do it because of this, exactly what you're saying.
I want to add also that the flexibility piece of it is really important. I always tell my students, if they want to use our asynchronous class time for our asynchronous activities, they're more than welcome to. But as long as they've done the asynchronous work before the next class, that's good. So if they want to do it, during our class time, great. If they want to do it an hour before our class, fine. If they want to do it at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, also fine, right? So that flexibility piece is really important too.
If I can add to that, I think that's exactly what we saw. I don't recall students necessarily talking about, oh, it's really hard to find a space between 12 and 2:30. They know that that's the limitation they're working with. So they think, okay, my asynchronous, I'm going to do it on Saturday morning before work. So they adjust to that as well. One person I think said though that they would recommend taking either the blended learning as either the first or the last class of the day for that exact reason. So they are aware too they can sort of build their schedule to take advantage of that.
Well, that's something department chairs should be told, right? When they're scheduling. So there's a lot that I'm thinking. I'm just curious from the perspective of those who have taught blended. So I already kind of talked to Andrea about this, but like when I saw in your presentation the fact that the students were more motivated when they felt that the teachers were accessible, right? Is there something, and this is just for reflection, is there something that, of course, for the students' benefit, they can do the work when it fits in their schedule. That's one of the advantages of blended learning. But for like in the procedure to have something where during that class on the blended learning day, at least a teacher would be available during that time so that if a student were working, because I know myself that if I were working on something asynchronously and I had a question and no one was answering me right away, I would just stop. Is there something that, would there be resistance to that notion of being available during the asynchronous portion of your class for your students, or is that something to think about?
I think it's kind of implied, at least in the pedagogy. One thing that came up when we were interviewing some students, they also recognized if I do my asynchronous work at 11:59, the day before it's due, or the day it's due, I can't expect an instantaneous response. So I have to plan that if I need help, there needs to be some kind of delay. So we need to think about that I think in conjunction with availability of the teacher. It's understanding from the student's part that if you need help, you need to expect it in a reasonable time. Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that I think modeling helps a lot. And I think as teachers, we have to set sort of parameters around, I'm only going to respond between 8 and 5:30, for instance. And students knowing that those are the boundaries because, you have a work life and you have a life outside of it. And I think modeling that for students is actually very important so that they can draw parameters around their lives as well. And I think that's like part of the modeling, also the modeling and how they're supposed to communicate with us. You have depending on what modality they're using, if they're using Teams, if they're using MIO, or if they're sending an email, that, this is how you write a proper email, and having that conversation and then responding to them in that fashion, having a greeting, putting a return, putting the content, and then like signing off. And students don't know these things. And so we have to model these things for students as part of it. So I think the communication we expect from students, we need to model in that way as well. So I think that's all part of it as well.
I think also the fact that the teachers need to offer online office hours might be another way to reach them. But I keep thinking always, ways to address students' concerns.
Hello, another question at the back.
So I have a question. It's about student supports. And at the GASPE, the slide said that there were student supports from student services. I'm wondering, what are the most common supports that you are seeing that students need beyond just the learning curve of, how do I manage my time, et cetera? What does student services need to provide? And I really appreciated, Candace, you mentioning modeling that time frame of the day. And I wonder if one of those supports needs to be talking about getting good sleep and the healthy needs of getting good sleep, because I've heard a few times the posting at 3 a.m., posting just before midnight, et cetera. And so I wonder if that's where those student services are coming in or elsewhere.
Yeah, just to talk about the GASPE context, it's a bit different, but they realized they had student in mental health crises and they were at a distance, and it was literally like, I'm on the phone with someone who is having like a suicidal moment, and how do I support them? But then they also added, it's more similar, I think, to our COVID context, like activities, sort of team building, things. But they also talked about how hard it was to motivate students to attend extracurricular activities, which I think is something that we all experienced. I was not a big user of supports as a student, so it's hard for me to answer that question, because as we said in our presentation, it seems to me that everything is mediated through the teacher. That is the first point of contact and perhaps the only one. Certainly, I would encourage people to think about how they can integrate the library into their asynchronous activities, or other their tutoring services and that kind of stuff. But that's as far as I can answer.
Piggyback on that a little bit. I think one of our responsibilities as stage up teachers is also recognizing that we are the space between high school and university. And so part of, in conjunction with, especially in gen eds, I think this is part of the role of gen eds, is to teach them these skills alongside the work that they're doing. So I think a big part of it is, if like in my classes, we talk about how do you read an article? Like, how do you approach it? Where do you sit? How comfortable are you? How do you take notes? All of these kinds of things. And they become like the 5-minute, the 10-minute prep for the assignment or the assessment that they're going to be working on next. So I think part of those skills are the responsibility of gen eds in terms of, creating the giving them the knowledge and the tools and the skills that they can then flex and do in other programs as well. So I think I mean, all of the students that we spoke to said teacher, teacher, teacher. Like our teachers are everything, for better or for worse. And I think we need to take that responsibility and say, you know, our job is to help them learn how to do these things, because they're not natural skills. They have to be learned. And some of these students come with the intellectual and cultural capital to sit in your class and quote unquote be a good student, and many don't. So we have to teach them the rules of the game so they can play it, and so that, you know, the playing field is a little bit more level.
So I just have a question for Andrea. How many of our phys ed teachers have tried blended learning? I mean, post-pandemic.
None.
Okay, so it's interesting that at our college, humanities and English are both gen ed. They're kind of leading the way on some of this, but phys ed's not involved. So we have like the capacity of having meetings online. I'd almost like to organize a discussion between our pedagogical counselors and the people in phys ed at your college that are doing this with people from our phys ed department, just so they can see what's going on. I'm not trying to impose it on them or force it, but I think that's such a curious thing that you think it's working really well, but we're getting no uptake at all in that department. It's very, very uneven the way it's taken up in an institution, and it can be related to a single teacher in a department or a little group of teachers who move it forward in a certain discipline, whereas another discipline where you would think it would be happening, nothing happens. So I don't know. That's just a curious thing. Maybe we can get in touch later and organize that.
I think it would be a great idea. Yeah, but
yeah.
Oh, I was going to say they do.
They're so comfortable.
I was just going to say, but they do innovative practices, and they do have, you know, their sort of their outdoor education, and they do their intensive. They do it. Not that I'm defending our gen ed teachers in the phys ed department, but because I know that is the discipline that as well that has talked more than any other about our attendance policy and how attendance in class is mandatory because that whole health and safety component, right? So they may lose that argument a little bit if maybe not, if they're teaching in that sort of blend. That's how they enforce the attendance policy so more harshly, if you will, than any other discipline because of that need to be in class for that health and safety piece. So, but it's interesting. Yes. Of course not. No. I didn't take it as a criticism.
We can take one more question, if anybody has. If not, we'll take one from the board. We'll take one from the board. Candace and Valerie, what was the most surprising finding of your research based on the fact that you taught blended before sort of diving into the qualitative data? Was there anything that was shocking to find out? It's what you expected?
Matter. That teachers matter more than we realized. I think oftentimes you feel like, you know, they can't remember your name from semester to semester and that sort of thing. And I think that to me was a surprising thing to hear over and over from students that their teachers mattered.
And also that they were willing to talk for an hour about blended learning. And they had things to say. I mean, at some point, a lot of it was explaining their schedules, like I work on Monday, so I do this and that, do that, and like it was a lot of that. But they were like they care about how their classes unfold, even if you might think they don't care about the content, they don't care about the assignments. School is their life, and they care about it.
It's a really nice sentiment to end on. Thank you. For the remaining questions that have been posted, we've created an online community on Teams that I believe you've all been added to, so we can address those as forum posts in that community. If you have any other questions while we do our wrap-up activity, please feel free to keep populating that form. So I'll invite Andrea up for our last activity of the day as I pull up the slides.
For this last activity, we have here three questions, and we'll give you 3 papers from the 3 colors. And the idea is that you answer each question on the right color. The first question is, what do you think is a key element of a blended learning policy? The second one is, how might blended learning modality benefit the English language education system? And the last one is, what I like most about blended learning is da da da. So we give you time to answer, and then once we finish, and if you need a pen, let me know. We have pens. I see people you might have finished. The idea now is that, do you see the colors in the room? First, to go and put your answers in the right color, the right 1, 2, 3. But then once you do that, you have to go around and pick one that you like, that you find interesting, that you find relevant. So, no, you need to first put it. So now you have to pick only one and take it. Don't leave it. One. Only one.
Oh, only one. No, that's okay.
Aha, that's more difficult. You got one? Okay. Only one. Only one. Let's start by colors. So I'll ask if you like to share, whoever has something in green, and like to share what you discovered from other people.
The one I picked up was 2 words, equity and availability. So what do you think is a key element of a blended learning policy? Equity and availability.
Thank you.
Why did I pick it? Because I thought those were 2 good words that seem to encompass important aspects of a policy that we should remember.
Thank you, Willie.
I picked out the one that said a proper definition of blended learning. And I had to laugh when I saw it. And speaking with Candace and Val, this has been like a 4-year process to define blended learning in a way that makes sense, that takes into account like the community of inquiry, but also takes into account the expectation that there is some sort of digital part attached to it. And I just, like I was just mentioning, like our Champlain definition, I'm going to read it too because I just think I love it. Blended learning incorporates traditional face-to-face class activities with planned asynchronous learning activities that are completed outside of the classroom. An institutionally defined portion of face-to-face time is replaced by these learning activities, which are overseen, supported, and reinforced by the teacher. Digital resources that enhance learning may be utilized. So the digital part isn't the emphasis on the instructional design. And to me, that's where blended learning sticks out. And I think adding in the technology is where it gets really, really hairy and messy, and to what extent and where do we put it and do we have to use it? And I mean, phys ed, we're proving that we don't need to use it, but we find ways. Anyways.
Thank you.
So I chose making it clear that there's a precise schedule to follow to make sure that the course would be the equivalent of an in-person course. And this really stood out to me because for all of my courses, I have a student class plan. and that is at the top of my Moodle page. And I tell the students at the beginning of the semester to either print it out or save it to their desktop, because that gives them all the information they need about what we're doing every week synchronously in class, what asynchronous work they have, and what assignments are due and when. And I also start every class by opening up that student class plan, like where were we, what did we do asynchronously, everyone there, any questions? And I end my class the same way. What are you doing asynchronously before we meet again? So I think that that's really important, and the students know that all the information that they're going to need is really on that document.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like having a map. And I like that you choose different things that are relevant. Yeah.
So I picked attendance and participation policy. How is this measured in an asynchronous context? And the reason I picked it, so when we're talking about a blended learning policy, my inclination is to go and think about design. So I think it's important for teachers building a course that they know what they expect from their students in terms of participation. But I think ultimately what a good blended learning policy does is that it invites that kind of reflection, but the teachers have the freedom to develop their own definitions and their own ability to create a course that suits their pedagogical and content needs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Candice?
I picked the one that said flexibility and empowerment for all of the reasons that Valerie just said.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Any more ring? Nope. Yes?
I picked up required training / workshops / one-on-one meetings with a PED counselor for teachers looking to teach BL courses. It just made me think of, like, I was just reflecting on, like, when it's there's a policy, it means that there's support, it means that there's all these structures that appear. There's also it's also standardized, so it's kind of, I like this idea that there's no there's less blurriness, and policies that also evolve, right? So I like this idea of having one centralized place where every teacher together are building a knowledge point. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's go through the pink. And the question was, how might blended learning modality benefit the English language education system? Anyone who wants to share their pink sticky note?
So I'll read what it says and then I'll make some comments. It says possibility of offering a specialized course like the EPAC model on a province-wide level to reach numbers in the Anglophone community. So one thing that I don't think came up today is how relevant blended learning could be to Cont Ed, right? For people who are working, and province-wide is one thing. And Cont Ed, I'll give you an instance from John Abbott. We have a biopharma program, the Lower North Shore, which you can't even get to by road. They are making natural cosmetics and things like that. So they wanted to some biopharma training, kind of for a very distant population like that. Blended learning might be worthwhile, including having them come to campus at some point to see the equipment. But even more locally, I know that in the Montérégie, south of us, there are rural populations who have difficulty going to CEGEP because they can't afford an apartment in Saint Anne de Bellevue, where we are, and they can't even afford to drive there every day. It's just too much. So there might be some populations that can be reached through blended learning. So I like the idea of the reach, including for people who have difficulty accessing regular things and content. Oh, no, this is what you.
Thank you. That's a good point. Yeah. Continuing education. Yes.
Hello. Mine says, I think that the asynchronous component, which mainly uses written format in online environment, may improve English literacy, which I thought was a really interesting point. Because it's, going outside of the English community, and anyone that speaks English as a second, third language, it's making learning more accessible to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think it's something that it's going through all the colleges about literacy, reading. Yeah. Yes.
So I have here one, this is in line with the first comments. It provides a variety of options for a variety of the students' needs. I think this be a very good opportunity for students and teachers. And of course, could be meet the need of the students and teachers at the same time, uh, provide some flexibility. And I think this is one of the major advantage of the blended learning.
Thank you. I'm gonna keep all the sticky notes and I'm gonna put it in the teams that we have so it stays there so we can reflect on them. Any more pink?
Offers choice for students of experiencing a different approach to a traditional course. So very similar to what the gentleman before me said. I think that's an obvious advantage of this modality.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So I picked the one that says BL could benefit the English language educational system by offering learning opportunities to English, allophone, and francophone students in diverse geographical locations. This one is very interesting. I find it's a very good way to promote the institution by offering courses that are available to students that live out of town or everywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, accessibility that we talked before. Pink?
Mine says it creates a more complex, innovative range of pedagogical opportunities for learners. So I guess reinforcing what was said earlier.
Thank you. Absolutely. Okay, so we go to the yellow. What I like most about blended learning is
I wanted to say I preferred it when I could take three, one of each color, but but I do have one in yellow. So I chose it for the design thinking that it's user centered. So I really like that emphasis. But I think not just hold it, right? Yeah. For it building with, not just for. So I really that's what I ended up choosing. But like I said, I would have taken a green one and a pink one too.
Thanks.
So I have one with 2 points. There is deeper understanding of curriculum design has made course experience more meaningful for students, and working in community collaboratively with my colleagues to design blended learning courses. And the reason this one spoke to me was that aspect of exploring something new like blended learning for the teacher allows them to really dig into what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What's the design of this course to give something better to the students? So everyone wins with this post-it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we talk about how we need to reflect on our teaching practices when we design these type of courses. Any more yellow?
The one that I chose is the ability to customize the blended learning for the individual and the content. So I think for myself, this is probably the power behind blended learning because students learn at different paces. And when you're in the classroom, sometimes it's too fast for many of the students. And in the asynchronous environment, they can take the time that they need to really try to process the information. The other thing I find as well, sometimes when we are face to face and you're dealing with a big group, is you're giving feedback to one or two students. Again, in the asynchronous environment, you can develop using technology different things like H5P activities, and you can embed the feedback in there. And every student in the class is getting the feedback as opposed to just the student who thought about it first. They came up with the answer and you're like, oh, that's great, let's move on, right? So for me, this is really the power behind blended learning.
Thank you. Yeah, I think and the possibility to review, repractice like by themselves. Yeah, thank you. Any more yellow? Thank you very much. I just wanted to recap on all the things that we did this afternoon in terms of strategies. We try, no? We did a couple of storytelling about ourselves and our journey with blended learning. We try to model about an asynchronous tool like Teams. We have a Teams now. Model these active learning activities that we have done together. We did the polling games. We pair and we share our thoughts with other people. Have some small discussions, some group going on. We build our community of practice. We have open-ended questions during my presentations. I try to put at least every couple of slides one question for you to make sure that you're awake. No, to make sure that we are together learning. We did movement because we went around. We put our sticky notes on the different panels, and then we did a lot of self-reflection about our practices in our institutions, in the class, and so on. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your participation. And thank you to Andrea Cooperberg, Valerie Baer, and Candice Steenbergen for being with us today for such interesting and deep conversations about this modality. Thank you again, Questgren and Islet, for providing us with a space to come together and discuss blended learning today. It's been a really wonderful collaboration. I'd like to invite Anita for our closing remarks today. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda and Andrea, and to our researchers. We made it, so it was truly enlightening and stimulating to be surrounded by a diverse group of individuals who are actively shaping our learning experiences on various levels. The exchange of strategies and tools coupled with the collaborative spirit that we saw today was truly impressive. And further to that, to explore how these tools can also support community vitality in the English language education sector is all the more exciting and provides us with thoughts to how we can continue this support. I want to also really extend my great thanks to all the participants for their presence and their willingness to share all of your valuable experiences. And a great thanks goes out to the John Abbott team, of course, Andrea Cooperberg, Amanda Argento, Doug Brown, of course, for their precious skill and cutting-edge knowledge of blended learning approaches as we saw today. I'd also like to express appreciation to the researchers, Valérie Berrer and Candice Steenbergen, I hope I pronounced that correctly, for their insights into this transformative potential of blended learning for students. And of course, lastly, I want to acknowledge my colleagues at Questgren, Anna Gomez, who's out front, and for her invaluable organizational support. Without her, all of this would not have happened in such a seamless fashion. Anna Hunt, who unfortunately isn't here today, she's unwell, but for her guidance in orchestrating this event, she is the queen of organizing wonderful Questgren events. And of course, to Lorraine O'Donnell, who's always our guide at Questgren, I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for partaking in this workshop. Thank you.